We're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone for coming tonight, and good evening. My name is Jamie Slaughter, and welcome to the Department of Toxic Substances Control's public input meeting for the Area 1 Burn Pit Removal Action Work Plan for the Santa Susana Field Lab. I'm a Senior Public Participation Specialist with DTSC and will be facilitating this meeting tonight. On behalf of DTSC, we are glad that you are all participating tonight. The Department of Toxic Substances Control's mission is to protect California's people, communities, and environment from toxic substances, to enhance economic vitality by restoring contaminated land, and to compel manufacturers to make safer consumer products. At this time, I would like to introduce the Director of the California Department of Toxic Substances Control, who will open our meeting with a welcome message. Dr. Williams joined DTSC in 2013, has served as the director since 2019, and is dedicated to serving and protecting California's environments and communities. Dr. Meredith Williams, thank you for your state service.
Thank you, Jamie, and welcome. Thank you all for making time for this Zoom this evening to talk about the Area 1 burn pit. We're here to talk about that very specific part of the cleanup. As many of you know, this is a very complex cleanup with many different areas that need to be cleaned up. And so this is just one area of focus for us. And we're about to enter a phase where we take some early action to clean up one of the most heavily contaminated areas at the site. And this meeting is intended to give you the information so that you understand what the cleanup will entail of the burn pit, how the process will work, and where the opportunities are for public comment and public engagement, so that you can monitor and provide input as we move through the process in this area. I know it's, for many of you, it's the end of a long workday. We greatly appreciate your taking the time to be here this evening. I think you'll find the information informative. I hope you do. We welcome your feedback as to whether or not that's the case. We're always trying to make sure you're getting what you need to understand this very complex cleanup. I don't want to take too much time because I want you to have the opportunity to learn. And we have our technical experts here today who will walk you through the process. But I very much want to thank you for attending. Thank you, Jamie, or Patrick. Jamie.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dr. Williams. The agenda for this meeting includes an overview of the purpose of this public input meeting, followed by a brief overview of DTSC and the Santa Susana Field Laboratory site. Our project manager, Patrick Mavle, will do a presentation on the Boeing Area 1 Burn Pit Removal Action Work Plan, and our DTSC SSFL project team will answer any questions and take input so that you can make informed input on the Area 1 Burn Pit RAW during the input period, which started on October 10th and goes through November 15th. Finally, we will present how you can provide input and access the draft documents, followed by next steps. The purpose of this input meeting is to review the Area 1 Burn Pit RAW and answer public questions so that interested stakeholders can submit informed input during the input period now through November 15th. You can provide input here at the public meeting through the form on the DTSC SSFL web homepage, email, or mail to the Chatsworth office. DTSC will review all input and respond to any questions where stakeholders request clarification in order to provide informed input. Due to the nature of this remediation being an imminent and substantial endangerment order, this input period is not required, and although DTSC won't provide a response to comment document, DTSC will require revision of the RAW if necessary based on input received, and include any changes made to the RAW in the approval letter. DTSC will distribute work notices prior to RAW implementation. Tonight, we ask that you please be courteous to all meeting attendees. This meeting is being recorded, and you may be muted if necessary. When providing input or asking questions, please unmute yourself, state your name and affiliation, and speak clearly and at an even pace. You may type questions or input into the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen throughout this meeting. Also, please adhere to the allotted time frame for questions and input and limit your question or input to one at a time. You may also re-enter the line to ask additional questions and provide additional input. SSFL is a 2,849-acre site overlooking Simi Valley to the north and northwest and the San Fernando Valley to the southeast. The site is located in the Simi Hills area of Ventura County, approximately 30 miles northwest of downtown Los Angeles. SSFL is a former complex of scientific research, development, and testing facilities where operational activities began in 1948 and ended in 2006. SSFL consists of 4 administrative areas used for research, development, and test operations, as well as undeveloped buffer areas. The Boeing Company, Boeing, the U.S. Department of Energy, DOE, and the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, are identified as the 3 responsible parties for the site. Tonight, we will focus on Boeing's Area 1 burn pit, indicated by the pink area in the center of the image. This slide displays some of the acronyms used in the Area 1 burn pit removal action work plan and in this meeting. You can download a copy of tonight's presentation from the DTSC SSFL web homepage about a week or 2 after this meeting. And now I will turn the meeting and presentation over to my fellow colleague, Senior Environmental Scientist and Project Manager, Patrick Mavle.
Thank you, Jamie. Good evening. My name is Patrick Mavle, and I'm a Senior Environmental Scientist. I have been with DTSC for about 15 years and several months ago transferred to SSFL unit. For the past 27 years, I've been living in the city of Canoga Park within 10-mile radius from SSFL. I care very much about my community, as do other members of my unit. It is with great pleasure to provide you with this presentation. The former Area 1 burn pit is approximately 5.8 acres in size and is located in southwestern portion of Boeing Administrative Area 1. Area 1 burn pit was established in 1958 and was historically used for destruction of chemicals by combustion and detonation until 1971. The Thermal Treatment Facility, or TTF, was operational for less than 2 years and ceased operation in 1990 and was used for small-scale destruction of explosive waste by open burning. During the RCRA facility assessment between 1989 and 1994, various solid waste management units and areas of concern within SSFL were identified, including the Area 1 burn pit. The Area 1 burn pit site was heavily graded numerous times after the site ceased operations. The grading leveled the site and filled in middle drainages. 2 removal actions have been performed at the Area 1 burn pit site. In 1981 and 1982, approximately 1,600 cubic yards of debris and soil were excavated from 6 locations in the central portion of Area 1 burn pit. This removal was done on the Regional Water Quality Control Board and California Department of Health Services, a predecessor to DTSC. Next slide, please. Area 1 burn pit is currently inactive and all structures have been demolished and removed. No buildings or other structures currently exist within Area 1 burn pit site. 1.7 acres of the site, including former TTF, are covered by non-woven polypropylene geotextile fabric to prevent contamination migration. While the geotextile fabric, which is not intended to serve as a permanent solution, has performed well to date, it is an interim measure. Predicted changes to regional weather patterns due to climate change, including the potential for more severe precipitation events, storms, wildfires, and high wind events, may potentially damage or destroy the geotextile fabric. These potential occurrences would expose wildlife and other ecological receptors to covered soil and render the fabric ineffective to protect against the runoff and migration of hazardous substances from the site. Surface water runoff at Area 1 burn pit is regularly monitored as part of National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System Monitoring Program under the oversight of Regional Water Quality Control Board. Other erosion control measures such as silt fencing, fiber rolls, sandbag barriers, and hydromulch have been implemented to control this erosion. Numerous field investigations to characterize the nature and extent of contamination in superficial media at Area 1 burn pit were performed between 1981 and 2015. The resulting data from these investigations were used to determine the level of ecological risk, including risk from chemicals and radionuclides. Next slide, please. Overall, SSFL cleanup is described and evaluated in the final PIR, released in 2023 in compliance with California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA. For the Boeing areas of responsibility, which include the Area 1 burn pit, the 2007 consent order, as amended by 2022 settlement agreement, defines the requirements for investigating and remediating contaminated soil and groundwater. For specific areas of the Area 1 burn pit site, referred to as early action areas, in the removal action work plan, however, DTSC has determined that there is an imminent and substantial endangerment to ecological receptors, like plants and animals. Accordingly, in 2022, DTSC issued an I-CENI order for removal of contaminated soil in the Area 1 burn pit. The work needed to implement this I-CENI order, including this rock, is exempt from CEQA, as this action is necessary to prevent or mitigate an emergency involving clear and imminent danger to ecological receptors. Next slide. The three objectives of this time-critical removal actions are explained in this slide. The first objective of this removal action is to remove soil that has radionuclide concentration in excess of the lookup table value to a depth of 1 foot greater than each exceedance, to maximum depth of 10 feet or refusal due to bedrock. The second objective is to remove soil within corrective measures study areas as necessary for chemicals of concern in soil, the concentration below ecological risk-based screening levels for ecological receptors. Based on previous ecological risk assessment, the maximum depth of exposure of any ecological receptor considered is 6 feet below grounds for the exposure of burrowing mammals, such as Salmonella, deer mouse, as shown in this slide. Therefore, the removal action will have a maximum depth of 6 feet below ground. The final objective is to remove soil between 6 inches and 2 feet underneath all areas covered by geotextile fabric as necessary to stabilize the site until a final cleanup is completed, pursuant to the 2007 consent order and the 2022 settlement agreement. This is not a final cleanup for Area 1 burn pit. The rest of the Area 1 burn pit will be addressed during the final cleanup for Boeing areas of responsibility, which is subjected to CEQA. Next slide, please. The figure depicts the early action areas in yellow and biological resources area in green with buffer zone around them. Any area with natural or cultural resource areas are named environmentally sensitive area, or ESA. These areas will be delineated with stakes, traffic cones, snow fencing, and caution tape to alert workers of the presence of biologically or culturally sensitive locations. No vegetation clearance or soil disturbance will commence prior to completing pre-soil disturbance surveys and the approval of this removal action work plan. Specific locations of sensitive species were identified within Area 1 burn pit during the 10 biological surveys completed between 2008 and 2022. Although Santa Susana tar plant is prevalent in SSFL, there is no direct or indirect impact to Santa Susana tar plant due to the proposal removal action. The potential presence of nesting birds and mammals will be determined and documented, particularly during the typical bird breeding season between the month of March and August. Work crews will be provided with an environmental sensitivity training describing the known or potential presence of protected plant and wildlife. The locations of previously identified culturally significant sites are not shown on this figure or in this RAW for confidentiality reasons and to protect them from potential vandalism. Prior to sampling activities, a cultural resource survey will be performed for the early action areas potentially impacted by removal action activities. Any identified cultural resources areas will be avoided and protected in place prior to work activities. A qualified archaeologist or cultural monitor will be on site during excavation and sampling activities. If archaeological materials are found on site in the designated areas during site activities, work will stop immediately in the vicinity until a qualified archaeologist has evaluated the find and appropriate actions have been implemented. Next slide, please. Early action areas, or EAAs, as depicted in this figure, are corrective measures study areas that are based on ecological risk assessment. Early action areas include both areas with radionuclide above lookup table values and contaminants posing imminent and substantial endangerment to ecological receptors. There are 12 areas indicating radionuclides exceedances above lookup table values. The lookup table value describes radiological cleanup levels that include local background concentration as well as minimum detection limits. The US EPA had provided assistance to DTSC in developing lookup table values. The basis for the timely response action in EAAs is to prevent clear and imminent danger to ecological receptors from contaminants in the top 6 feet of soil at Area 1 burn pit. Soil excavation will also stabilize the site by preventing contaminant runoff and migration until final remedies for soil and groundwater corrective measures are evaluated and selected for implementation in the final cleanup. Additional soil and groundwater cleanup of the Area 1 burn pit will be conducted as part of a site-wide cleanup. The proposed final remedy will be shared with the public for comments before it is approved by DTSC for implementation. Next slide, please. This table outlines the soil remedial goals that were determined for chemicals of ecological concern and for radionuclides with detection above the respective lookup table values. The ecological risk-based screening levels are concentration-based values that have been developed for San Susana Field Laboratory to help identify contaminant concentrations in soil, sediments, and water that may potentially be harmful to plants and animals such as hermit thrush and deer mouse. There isn't a single source of ecological risk-based screening values, so the ecological risk-based screening level used for SSFL come from a variety of sources, including the US EPA ecological soil screening levels and scientific literature. The ecological risk assessment identified constituents such as dioxin, mercury, and volatile organic compounds that need to be cleaned up based on overall site risk. A hotspot analysis was also done on a point-by-point basis, and samples with constituents that exceeded screening levels by 10 times, such as nickels and PCBs, were identified for cleanup. Radium-226 was identified as a priority 2 radionuclide. And since the UCPA lookup table value were not calculated for priority 2 radionuclide, DTSC is using the background threshold value set by US EPA during US EPA SSFL radiological background study. Excavation will continue vertically until all remedial action objectives are achieved. For ecological receptors, the maximum depth will be 6 feet below ground. For radionuclides, the maximum depth will be 10 feet below ground or until bedrock refusal is encountered. To stabilize the site, areas covered by geotextile fabric, the maximum depth will be 2 feet or 10 feet below ground where radionuclides are present. Confirmation sampling after soil excavation from the side walls and the bottom ground ensures that the soil remedial goals have been achieved. Confirmation sampling results will be submitted to DTSC as per the removal action implementation report for DTSC to review. Next slide, please. This figure shows the site-wide air monitoring stations within SSFL. The monitoring results for radionuclides and volatile organic compounds or particulate matter are presented in quarterly reports submitted to DTSC for Boeing areas of responsibility. The Boeing Air Monitoring Station number 4 and 5 are located southeast and south of Area 1 burn pit, respectively. The direction of prevailing wind moves from northeast to southeast of Area 1 burn pit. The result of the individual radionuclide sampling is compared to yearly ambient regional background conditions. Additionally, air monitoring samples from Boeing Area Monitoring Station number 4 and 5 will be collected during excavation activities, and results will be included in the removal action completion report. Next slide. Daily personal air monitoring will take place during work activities. Handheld monitoring devices will be used to monitor any potentially dangerous volatile organic compounds, dust, or airborne particulates. During soil-disturbing activities, volatile organic compounds and particulate matter will be monitored at least hourly at 4 locations outside Area 1 burn pit parameter. Wind direction and wind speed will be measured during all remediation activities using the existing weather station located on site. Soil-disturbing operations will stop if sustained wind speed exceeds 25 miles per hour for 5 consecutive minutes in a single hour. If the difference between the upwind and downwind for volatile organic compound concentration exceeds 1 part per million by volume, for more than 2 hours, additional mitigation measures will be implemented. Excavation will stop if the difference between an upwind and downwind air particulate or dust reading exceeds 50 microgram per cubic meter to determine if the dust in the downwind reading is from excavation-related activities. Work may resume after dust control measures such as spraying of water are adjusted to reduce dust emissions. Dust control measures will be implemented for all stockpiles pursuant to Ventura County Air Pollution Control District Rule 55 for fugitive dust. All excavation and waste handling activities will be closely monitored by operational personnel for dust generation. Dust mitigation will be performed continuously during the excavation activities by applying sufficient water to the source of dust. Pre-excavation spraying may be performed as needed using a sprinkler system setup installed over the proposed excavation area. Dust mitigation will continue during loading and hauling activities by applying water to the waste material in stockpiles as needed. In all cases, water will be supplied using a 2,000-gallon water truck equipped with front, back, and side sprayer, as well as water hose equipped with spray mist nozzle. Next slide, please. SSFL site boundary air sampling for airborne radioactive material also includes the Area 1 burn pit site. The air monitoring at Area 1 burn pit as part of SSFL site-wide sampling will be ongoing throughout the removal action during action, including off-site, during off-shift hours and weekends. Ambient background exposure dose rate at the excavation site will be collected and identify locations with elevated exposure rate. Any person performing work inside a radiation control area is required to receive radiological awareness training. Air sampling of the worker breathing zone is achieved by using a personal air sampler for personnel working in close proximity of radiologically impacted soil. These air samplers are small, portable, have a battery-operated air pump, and are attached to the collar as close as possible to the breathing zone. The sampler contains a filtration medium for radioactive contaminants. Next slide, please. Radiologically contaminated soil will be sorted by using a soil sorting system manufactured by ISO Pacific. The soil sorting system will consist of a roughly 6-foot wide main conveyor belt, which will transport the soil material through radiologically scanned by passing underneath the photon detectors. The soil sorting system will use a background level of 1.82 picocurie per grams, which is based on background threshold values for radium-226 as determined by US EPA background study for screening and initial sorting of excavated soil. The resulting radionuclide impacted and non-impacted soil stockpiles may not be placed within a range where potential mixing would be possible. Water misting system may be installed over the soil sorting system feed conveyor as needed to mitigate dust. If necessary, the misting system would be connected to a live water source or a 500-gallon water trailer positioned on the screening pad. The radionuclide impacted stockpile would be temporarily stored in containment areas over geofabric liner with concrete or water-filled barriers. Plastic sheeting will be secured over the stockpiles in contaminated areas. Any rainwater contained inside the stockpile pads will be pumped into an on-site tank or 55-gallon drums for sampling, characterization, and off-site recycling or disposal. Stockpile material will be sampled and chemically and radiologically characterized for proper off-site disposal. Next slide, please. This figure in the removal action work plan shows the soil transportation truck routes from SSFL site to the 118 highway. The total volume of excavated soil is expected to be approximately 15,000 cubic yards or approximately 1,000 truckloads, assuming an average truckload of 15 cubic yards. Ventura County grading permit is anticipated to require releases of trucks out of the site at a rate of no more than 1 per 12 minutes. The selected transporters will be qualified, fully licensed, and insured to transport the waste generated. For transportation of hazardous waste, the selected transporter will be the registered hazardous waste hauler. Department of Transportation, state, and federal requirements will be followed for all waste leaving the site. No waste would be transported or disposed of at any treatment storage disposal facility in the city of Simi Valley. RCRA hazardous waste and non-RCRA hazardous waste, also known as California hazardous waste that meet the radiological release criteria, will be transported to Clean Harbor's Button Below landfill or Waste Management Kettleman Hills landfill. RCRA hazardous waste that meet the radiological release criteria but requires treatment to meet land disposal restriction standards will be transported to U.S. Ecology in Beatty, Nevada or Grand View, Idaho. Radioactive materials will be transported by U.S. Department of Transportation approved carriers, and shipping documentation will be developed by qualified radioactive material shippers. Excavated soil with concentration of radium-226 above naturally occurring radioactive material of 1.82 picocuries per gram will be transported and disposed of outside of California. Boeing will work with facilities such as U.S. Ecology in Beatty, Nevada, and U.S. Ecology in Grandview, Idaho, on profiling the waste for proper disposal. Next slide, please. There are very stringent safety requirements for trucks moving hazardous waste within Area 1 burn pit and those transporting hazardous soil outside of the SSFL. There will be plastic sheeting on the ground in portions of early action areas to prevent cross-contamination during transportation of hazardous waste. All heavy equipment in contact with hazardous waste material and moving off EAAs onto clean ground within Area 1 burn pit will be decontaminated using dry method and, if necessary, using pressure washer and/or steam cleaner. Prior to leaving Area 1 burn pit, all trucks will proceed to decontamination pad located adjacent to the work area for dry or wet decontamination. Contamination of any radiologically contamination shall only be performed by trained radiation safety staff. Radiation detectors will be used to scan, survey all small trucks going to soil laydown areas designated for non-hazardous soil to ensure that they are kept clean. All trucks leaving the site with hazardous waste material from laydown areas will be scanned in the same fashion to make sure that they are also clean. The effectiveness of the contamination will be surveyed by using a radiation detector. All material will be completely covered with a tarp before leaving SSFL. Bulk shipment of hazardous soil will be wrapped with heavy gauge plastic and taped to ensure that contamination is sift-proof. Trucks will be inspected before leaving the SSFL, and the inspection will include a visual check of tire conditions, brake pads, latches, properly secured covering, placarding, and hauling documentations. The inspection results will be logged in a daily construction logs. Next slide, please. This slide shows the overall schedule for the removal action as presented in the removal action work plan. The anticipated removal action schedule may change based on length of time needed to consider public inputs prior to approval of the removal action work plan for implementation. Additional schedule changes may be based on the time needed to obtain appropriate permits, equipment mobilization, and safety checks, as well as changes in weather or rain. This is a time-critical removal, and DTSC expects to meet anticipated agreed upon date with Boeing, which is the end of December 2024. As specified in the 2022 ISNE order, monthly reports describing completed and upcoming activities for the following month will be submitted to DTSC. DTSC will be notified 7 days in advance before field activities or sampling, so DTSC can provide field oversight. Implementation of this removal action work plan will be documented in an implementation report submitted to DTSC within 60 days of completion of field activities and receipt of all validated analytical data. Jamie?
Thank you so much, Patrick. The draft documents and additional information are on EnviroStore. You can also scan the QR code on the screen to access the raw document. The input period is now through November 15th. You can provide input here at the public meeting through the form on the DTSC SSFL web homepage, email, or mail to the Chatsworth office. DTSC will review all input and respond to any questions where stakeholders request clarification on the raw in order to provide informed input. Although DTSC won't provide a response to comment document for this input period, DTSC will require revision of the raw if necessary based on input received and include any changes made to the raw in the approval letter. DTSC will distribute work notices prior to raw implementation. Before we begin the question, answer, and input portion of the meeting, we will take a 5-minute break. We will resume at 6:44 p.m. Let's review the meeting agreements. We ask that you please be courteous to all meeting attendees. All input is being recorded and you may be muted if necessary. When providing input or asking questions, please state your name and affiliation and speak clearly and at an even pace. Please adhere to the 2-minute allotted time frame for questions and input. Based on participation, we may adjust the time frame. Please limit your questions or input to one at a time, and you may also re-enter the line to ask additional questions and provide additional input. You may also type your questions or input into the Q&A section. If you have dialed in on your phone, if you are called on, we will call by the last 4 digits of your phone number, and we ask that you press *6 to unmute yourself or to re-mute yourself, and you can also press *9 to raise or lower your hand. So we'll start with raised hands. And we will start with Christina Walsh. Christina, will you please unmute yourself, state your affiliation, and please ask your question or your input.
Hi. Hello. Yes,
Hi.
My name is Christina Walsh with landrelief.org. I have some questions and comments. In the raw, it states that there will be a 10-foot berm. And I don't think that that's sufficient because of the 160 million gallons of potential stormwater per day as detailed in the NIPD's permit. In historic documents, including the Tiger Team report and interviews, there was an overflow that resulted in several hundred head of cattle that died overnight in the Dayton Canyon Ranch, and that can be verified. Also, in your documents, it indicates the tar plant is in places that it appears to be under the tarp. So I'd like clarification about that. And also, it shows that storage would be done at CTL 5. That's very steep and covered in the tar plant. So you would be driving over it. So it doesn't seem like that's ideal, and it would be better to use CTL 3 where it's flatter and it's already been disturbed for that purpose. I wish the report was organized so it mentioned human health risk as well, so that people involved that are going to deal with these impacts for their futures should understand how this translates to human health. While it shows chemicals on your document, it did not in the main portion of the raw, which is 58 pages versus 1,300. So something could be done there, I think. In the early action details, it says there's no known source for radionuclides, but burned waste from all areas of the site came to Area 1. According to the Tiger Team report, it was completely out of control. They even closed it, and then waste undocumented was left outside the gate for, and it was burned to destruction for the purpose. Can I finish?
We want to make sure that we stick to the time frame, but we want to just address a couple of.
I just like to also say that I appreciate the wind standards that you have put in place. The health standards for the workers are much different from the past, and that is appreciated. And then, yes, if you could please respond, I appreciate that as well. Thank you.
Thank you for your input. And does anyone from the project team want to address some of the concerns here for the question portion? Thank you, Christina. Patrick, you're muted.
Thank you, Jamie. I would like to respond to the tar plant. Within the early action areas in Area 1 burn pit, there aren't any tar plants, and specifically underneath the geotextile fabric, there are really no tar plants. There used to be one, but it died out and it never returned. There are areas where there is going to be temporary storage, as you mentioned, and there are some tar plants as indicated in the figure. However, there are buffer zones around it, and the team will be trained and they'll be very careful not to go anywhere near those tar plants. Right before any soil excavation activity, there would be a biological survey to ensure that if there are any more tar plants growing on site, there would be a buffer zone around them, so then they would be completely avoided. In respect to you offering another location, we would definitely take that into consideration.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Bonnie, will you please unmute yourself and state your affiliation and ask your question or provide your input?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, this is Bonnie Klee, and I am very concerned about the Area 1 burn pit. I used to work up there. When I got my first cancer in 1995, I was told by a man who worked there also that they used to take their trucks to Area 4, fill it up, and dump it in the burn pit and watch it explode. And they found that was really fun. And then I was always concerned because it was covered for like 60 years. And I'm wondering, how far down is it? Where does it drain? And how far out is it? And has it moved? Has it moved and deepened in in the last 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. And then last year I had a phone call from a man who studied it, and he said once you start cleaning that burn pit, that the whole mountain could blow up. So that's what I know about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Bonnie. And Patrick and technical team. So Bonnie wanted to know, how far down is the contamination? Where does it drain to? Has it migrated, and how deep has it gotten in the last 10 years? Who would like to respond to that, please?
Jamie, I can respond to that. So this particular cleanup is an emergency cleanup and is supposed to be addressing 3 factors, one of which is ecological receptor down to 6 feet below ground. And that's particularly in the studies for mammals that burrow down to 6 feet below ground. Another purpose is to make sure that there's no runoff for areas that has shallow contaminant by putting geotextile fabric. And although geotextile fabric has done a good job so far, but there's no guarantee, especially with changes in the weather and other natural event that may happen. So we want to make sure that we are protecting any potential migration of contaminants from going laterally as well as vertically. And lastly, we want to address the radionuclides. As far as how deep it's gone, it's still under investigation. We are doing technical and economical evaluation to see how much soil would be removed at the final cleanup to ensure that we are being protective of human health and environment. As far as anything exploding on site, Boeing has designated the specialist that would be on site, and this person has been trained in detonating anything that could potentially explode. In the event that they would come across anything of unknown or anything of similar nature, this person would be handling the case, and we would be carefully removing the material if possible and detonating it. In the event that they're not sure of what to do with it, they would leave it in place, and it would make sure that no one would come near it, so then it would be addressed later.
Thank you, Patrick. Our next question or input would be from Julie Korenstein. Would you please unmute yourself, state your affiliation, and ask your question or provide your input?
Thank you. Julie Korenstein. I am a community member. There was so much presented tonight. I'm trying to digest it, and I'm not a scientist, and I'm not, and I've never worked there. I appreciate the people prior to me, but mine are just, I guess, down to earth, so to speak, common sense questions that I'm trying desperately to figure out. If the burn pits are not cleaned thoroughly, and I just heard, I'm sorry, I don't remember the gentleman's name, something about if it's explosive, it may remain there. Will toxins continue to seep into the groundwater and impact Simi Valley? My granddaughter and family and infant son just moved to Simi Valley, and I'm so worried about the water supply and the water that's going into the local wells, and it's being blended in with other water. I know that there is a sign actually at the Santa Susana Field Lab that says only bottled water is to be used for drinking. That scares me. They don't want anyone there. So one question has to do, how thorough is this going to be, and will we not have to worry about drinking water in Simi Valley? The other question is, how long does the cleanup take? I heard that you said 1,000 trucks, and there was a teeny little, I could barely read it with my glasses on the left corner. I was hoping you would show that again, the route that the trucks are going, which it looked like it was going down the backside of the mountain. The backside of the mountain. No, that's not the, no. Oh, yes, it is. I'm sorry, in blue. I could barely read it. I needed a magnifying glass. And that is going down, I guess, Woolsey Canyon Road. And then it somehow ends up at Roscoe Boulevard near Lowe's, and then comes up Topanga Canyon to the 118 and then goes east to the 5? Something like that? I guess to
Correct.
go to the ones that are up further north, Kettleman and Button Willow and all of that. I don't know about the ones that go to Nevada, Utah, and Texas.
2 minutes are up.
Okay, I'm sorry, but just when does this begin and when are you figuring it will end? And if you can, I'm sorry, I have so many questions.
Thank you, Julie. If you want to raise your hand again, we can come back around, and right now we can address some of your concerns. So
Okay.
Patrick, Julie would like to know about the drinking water, toxins going into the groundwater, and concern about wells and well water and mixing of the water, and will it be fully cleaned up? So thank you so much, Julie, for your questions.
Thank you, Jamie. I'd be very happy to respond. So as a community member myself, who's been living since 1995 in the same community, Canoga Park, I do drink the water. Our wells that produce drinking water are heavily tested, and the reports are out there for the public to view. I have no qualm about drinking tap water, and I have been doing that, and so has my family. As far as the timeline, so we expect to get input and consider input, and towards the end of this year, the removal action work plan would be approved, and we expect to start the cleanup sometimes in spring. By midsummer, we expect the cleanup to be finished, and then we expect to be receiving a completion report from Boeing towards the end of the year. So by the end of next year, it would be completed. And I wanted to say that I do appreciate your comments. There was certainly a lot of material presented. I do understand, and I hope that you would go to our website, and if you get a chance, please go to Renewable Action Work Plan. I know there's a lot of material. I'm trying to recall another question.
Could I just make sure, you said spring 2025 it begins, the cleanup?
Next spring of 2024, cleanup will begin at Area 1 burn pit.
Okay, and then it ends by 1 year? I don't know what you're saying.
So at the end of this year, end of 2023, this removal action work plan would be approved after reviewing all the inputs. And next spring of 2024, cleanup will begin. And by the end of 2024, we expect everything to be completed.
Oh.
But do keep in mind that this is not the end of Area 1 burn pit, because we are expecting to receive a corrective measure study report for all areas of responsibility for Boeing, which is about 2,400 acres, and that would be coming in towards the end of next year, and that would address everything else that has not been addressed in this time.
This is just the burn pit 1 that you gave me the timeline, correct?
Yes, this is just for Area 1 burn pit, which pertains to this particular ISNE order.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you, Julie. We're going to take one more question from raised hands, and then we're going to move to some of the questions or input in the Q&A portion. So anyone that would like to continue to type in the Q&A portion, we welcome that. And we are also answering that diligently during this call. Adam Salkin, will you please unmute yourself, state your affiliation, and please ask your question or provide your input.
Yes, hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, my name is Adam Salkin. I grew up around the area. I wanted to know who is doing the initial sampling as well as the confirmation sampling. How many samples are going to be taken for the initial samples as well as the confirmation sampling? What labs are going to be used for both, and what kind of equipment is going to be used?
Jamie, I can respond to that. So the site characterization for the entire Area 1 burn pit, including Boeing area of responsibility, has been completed. The site is fully characterized, and that's why we're moving to the next stage of cleanup, which is evaluating removal action work plan for, corrective measures study for soil and groundwater, and evaluating different remedies and asking and soliciting public comments. And then after evaluation is completed, we will select a remedy. There are going to be about 98 to 100 confirmation sampling. These samplings will be done as soil is being excavated. It would be approximately at 20 feet on a sidewall. So every 20 feet on a sidewall of this excavation area, there would be a sample taken. And also there would be sample taken from the very bottom of the excavation area to ensure that the remedial action goals have been achieved.
Thank you, Patrick.
And who is doing the sampling?
The sampling would be done by Boeing, and they do have an environmental consultant, Jacobs.
Yeah, is there anybody else other than the corporation that could do the sampling that we can trust, especially for confirmation sampling?
Well, during confirmation sampling, DTSC would be providing oversight to ensure that the samples are being taken from the correct areas. And all the laboratories.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Yes, and the sampling would be going to an accredited laboratory for results. All of these analytical data would be submitted to the DTSC, and they would be heavily scrutinized.
It's my understanding that DTSC doesn't have, can't do radiological sampling. So could the EPA do confirmation sampling instead of Boeing?
Well, the sampling is done by Boeing. They do not have their own laboratory, so this analytical data will not be done per se by Boeing. And you are right. So because DTSC doesn't really do the kind of cleanup that involves radioactive material, we are engaging California Department of Public Health, and they are helping us with that.
But it's not going to be them that's doing the sampling or using their labs. It's going to be Boeing that's going to be handling it all and is going to be using labs that they have control over. So can EPA, using their labs, have control over confirmation sampling?
I don't have a response. Would someone else like to respond to that?
Sarah, did you want to contribute?
Yeah, Patrick, can you describe whether or not DTSC employees will be present on site during sampling at certain times, and explain the process for collecting samples, having the samples sealed, and then arriving at the laboratory with a seal and a chain of custody, and explain a little bit about the certifications of the laboratories and how they do quality control? And if anybody else on the program staff knows our options if we suspect or authority regarding doing our own confirmation sampling if we see suspect results.
But Boeing has been caught doing faulty sampling in the past, so the community doesn't have a lot of trust in them after watching them do, all of these kinds of sampling in the past that have had issues, which is why I'm asking the question.
Yeah, I understand your concern. So I'm hoping that Patrick can answer questions about, or somebody on the program staff can answer questions regarding how samples are sealed, and DTSC's employees that will be on site during the removal action.
Yes, and then just maybe also add in that Boeing they don't have any sort of oversight or control over the labs.
Yeah, so DTSC would be present during all sampling, and we've done this for a long time. I've done field oversight for almost 20 years. When they do take sampling, it is observed by us, and there's a chain of custody. They're not allowed to tamper or touch or do anything else with the sampling. It goes into the vial, and it's sealed, and it goes into a Ziploc bag, and it is mailed from there into a laboratory. And along the way, wherever it goes, whoever that comes in contact, not with the sample, but with the packaging, would have to sign their name and put their information down on the chain of custody.
Yeah, well, because of the building that was, destroyed and all the dust that went into there recently, with DTSC in control of that, and with Boeing having lied to the water board under oath without getting any penalties for that, there's a lack of trust in the community, which is why it's not enough just to say that Boeing has a certain there's a certain control over the situation. We've heard that before, and there's been a lack of control when we've been told there's controls, and we've seen that happen for many decades. So that's why I'm asking if somebody that we can trust could be doing the sampling.
So Adam, this is standard protocol that we have going on here. DTSC provides oversight of a responsible party or a proponent sampling to ensure that it's conducted according to the work plan and submitted to a laboratory under chain of custody. And then that laboratory analyzes independently according to their accreditation. So there really is no need for concern over that, to be quite honest. It's standard procedure.
Adam,
Right,
So
but
I think we're going to have to move on at this point, Adam.
if standard procedure is having issues for all these decades, then we need to change standard procedure.
Adam, I don't want to mute you, but I do want to ensure that everyone has a fair chance to be able to contribute. So if you want to raise your hand, we can let you ask another question or provide input, or if you would like, I can get your contact information and then we can reach out to you so that you can have a more in-depth conversation with our project manager. Thank you. And we're going to move to the question and answer portion. And one of our team members, Bill Martinez, will read them and then we'll have our project team respond. Thank you.
All right, good evening. I have a few questions here, and we'll start off one from Michaela Partington. And Michaela asks, will there be a program to monitor for offsite contamination? I'm concerned about the offsite contamination into nearby communities. And this is a good question. We currently monitor groundwater and the air particulates from the site. We have a robust groundwater monitoring program with over 600 wells at the site. And we test for all the chemicals throughout different portions. And so if there is anything going off the site in the groundwater, we are aware of it. And again, we also have a monitoring program for air with 14 stations located around the site. We test for particulates, radionuclides, and other types of chemicals, volatile organic compounds. And so if there is anything migrating off the site, we would be aware of it. So that's the current protocol. When we go into the actual Area 1 burn pit removal activities, there will be an additional layer of air monitoring as described in the RAW, which is more localized, closer to the actual areas where there's excavation, and it has more focused data gathering. So it also collects the same slew of information. So that's how we make sure that if there's contamination going off site, we would be aware of it. Are there any other comments from the DTSC staff and technical staff who would like to provide additional information on that? Okay. Shall we move on to the next question?
Yes, please.
All right, this one is from Jenny Knack. The recent years, DOE's building demolition SOP has mandated that water dampening for dust mitigation be implemented, but it was never implemented. How will DTSC ensure dust mitigation actually happens this time? Patrick, you're very familiar with the RAW and the dust mitigation and dust control processes that will be happening during the Area 1 burn pit removal action. Did you want to take this one?
Sure, Bill, thank you. I mean, there will definitely be dust mitigation measure. There are trucks, 2,000-gallon trucks, and they will be spraying. They have sprayers at the bottom, on the side, and even with hoses. It'll definitely take place, and we would have monitoring devices to ensure that the threshold is met and that we are not going above the threshold where it would pose a risk to on-site workers or the community. DTSC will be providing field oversight, so we would be present at all time, and DTSC has its own monitoring devices, so we would be testing for particulate at the same time as they are to ensure that the device is working and to ensure that they are sticking to and that they are adhering to removal action work plan.
And Patrick, also, isn't there air monitoring at the site perimeter?
There are ongoing air monitoring that happens on site, immaterial to Area 1 burn pit. This is something that happens regularly, and we get quarterly reports from that. And also there would be specific monitoring during any field activity on site.
Thank you, Patrick.
All right, we have another. Oh, go ahead.
I also wanted to mention as another safety measure, the workers would be wearing these devices that kind of connects to the upper part of the collar, and these are personal air sampler that actually have a battery operated vacuum that has a flow rate that is very similar to a worker engaging any physical activity. And these have a cassette filter, and these would be specifically sampled to ensure that there's no danger to the workers on site because of the particulate matter and dust that's being generated.
Thank you, Patrick. Bill, do we have any other Q&A?
We do have several others. We've got we have a few more from Jenny Knack. I'll read this next one and then we'll give some questions from some of the other participants and then circle back to Jenny. But this next one is, again, from Jenny. Where specifically will stormwater at the EAAs be routed to? Silvernail? So Patrick, is that one, do you think you can answer? Or do you want to take that one?
Sure. So, there are different areas within Area 1 burn pit. There are areas where the soil is being stored, and these are within those boundary 10-foot high concrete padding that are either concrete or water filled to ensure that water remains in there. Any stormwater that goes in there from rain or precipitation would be collected. All of them actually would be collected within this area into 55 gallons, and then they would be sampled and then profiled and properly disposed of. Any other stormwater would be not really living off-site per se. We want to make sure that any contaminant that leave off-site goes through the outfall and it gets tested per requirement of water board. In the event that some water do get into, there's a pond right next to Area 1 burn pit, and this pond collects water. But this pond, I wanted to say, it used to be dry. Sometimes during heavy precipitation, especially lately, has been containing water. This water gets pumped into another pond called Round 1, Pond Round 1, and there it would the water would be treated, and it would come back to an outfall, and this is outfall number 11, directly to the south of Area 1 burn pit, right by the original pond, parameter pond. And then from there, it would go into the outfall, and then it would go to the regular sampling that takes place per monitoring requirement of the permits, the discharge permits. If anyone would like to add anything extra, please do.
Thank you, Patrick. Bill, do we have any more QA, or would you like me to take more raised hands?
Let me do at least one or two more Q&As here. I know we have a lot of attendees who want to ask their questions in person, but we've got some ones here that I think are good to discuss.
Thank you.
This one is from Deva Andrews. Patrick just stated that the explosive possibility might be dealt with at a later date. That is not a good option. Since this hasn't been cleaned up since 1959, what is his definition of a later date? I think we've touched upon this, but I believe this is regards to, we're discussing the Area 1 burn pit ISNE raw, but there will be further cleanup later. And Patrick, do you want to expand on that?
Sure. So as part of a site-wide cleanup, we do expect to receive a corrective measure study, and anything else that isn't addressed in this particular time-critical emergency-based cleanup would be addressed. Again, we want to be very careful if there's going to be anything that could possibly come close to being an explosive, and Boeing would have a specialist on site. And if there's anything that needs to be detonated and dealt with, they have the proper training. We don't. They have the proper training, and they would deal with that. And by saying that it would be addressed at a later time, I meant that anything that hasn't been addressed by this particular cleanup that goes down to 6 feet below ground would be addressed in a final cleanup.
Thank you, Patrick. Bill? Do you want to take one more?
Let's do one more.
Great.
This one is from Seti Kane. And the ISE order referenced the March 2021 RECRA facility investigation data summary and findings report for the Area 1 burn pit when identifying the 12 COECs. And correct me if that is, I think that's supposed to be COPCs that are being addressed in the raw. However, the RFI reported 77 chemicals detected above screening levels, 35 of which were above the ECO RBSL. Why were the 12 chemicals selected for an IS&E cleanup, but not the other 65, which were also detected above screening levels? And Patrick, I think you have the answer for that one.
I do. So we're looking at contaminants that have would be deleterious to ecological receptors, and these are predominantly in the top 6 feet of soil. And the reason that we pick those particular chemicals is because of their endpoints for the mammals that would burrow up to 6 feet below ground. If I understood it correctly, if I understood the question correctly, that would be my response. Brian, do you have a better response, or you want to add to that?
I mean, this is an interim action, right? So it's limited in its scope. We're going to go back at the end and do a more broad cleanup that's going to cover everything that isn't covered in this initial action. I believe some of those chemicals are in soil vapor. I'd have to go back and look at that on the whole, though. Whereas we're focused on a soil cleanup right now, so that's I think at least one of the reasons that why that's the case. But it is an interim action, and again, nothing is going to be left behind when we get to the end of this. So,
Thank you. Thank you, Ryan. We're going to take a couple of raised hands now. We're going to start with Tevin Schmidt. Tevin, can you please unmute yourself, state your affiliation, and please ask your question or provide your input?
Thank you, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. My name is Tevin Schmidt. I'm the watershed scientist for the Wish-Toyo Foundation. I wanted to bring up some of my questions and stuff that were in the Q&A that didn't quite get handled. So you guys chose the 6 feet burrow depth for the ecological receptor. In the raw, it's just listed as deer mouse. Patrick, I'm sorry, but this is always going to be a trust issue for DTSC and people that are in the area. But the Santa Susana field or deer mouse that you mentioned is not a species. It's the California deer mouse in the region, and they have the shallowest and shortest burrow length of any deer mouse in North America. So there's not really any reason to be using that species as an ecological receptor as a burrowing species. It should be California ground squirrels, which regularly burrow below 6 feet. Brian brought up that, in a note, they use the average of multiple species, but the data and the citation used for ground squirrels was from 1946. We have over a century of integrated pest management programs that regularly monitor ground squirrels in flood control infrastructure and their depths and how they burrow. So that's just not sufficient evidence to say that 6 feet is enough. Further, the NPDES monitoring ports in the last 8 years, every single time there's a storm event, they have an exceedance of some pollutant. This last year, and the year before, they had exceedances of dioxins coming off the site. Dioxins are can penetrate soils pretty deep. I've personally sampled other facilities where I found dioxins below 6 feet. And so there's a clear pathway, ground squirrels that can burrow below 6 feet. There's pollutants that are coming off the site that we have evidence for, dioxins, that can penetrate that deep into the soil, that can absolutely impact species like ground squirrels. And further, ground squirrels provide burrowing habitat for species that can't burrow themselves. There's state protected species like burrowing owls, state protected species like the San Diegan tiger whiptail, state protected species like the Blainville's horn lizard. There's a pathway for dioxins to get into all of these, as well as mesopredators and apex predators that prey on ground squirrels. So I know this is one issue, but I don't think your evidence for burrow depth or for depth of remediation is sufficient.
So, I mean, your point's taken, Tevin. Thanks for your input. I posted a copy of our eco note that's been our guidance document now for 25 years. I agree that there is other data available. You have to remember, though, that also ecological risk assessment isn't necessarily supposed to be an absolute reflection of reality. We pick representative receptors, and we actually treat them differently in ways that make the approach more conservative and more health protective. And that's because we don't have data on all of the possible receptors that we would potentially could run a risk assessment on. So it's a tool for helping to make decisions. It's not an absolute reflection of reality on the ground. And so, I mean, I agree with what you're saying. There is data available. So
Thank you, Brian. And Tevin, if you would like, you can, if you want to put that in writing and go into a little more detail, you can email that to us, or you can mail that in, or if you go to our SSFL homepage, there's a form, and then you can put that so that way you don't feel rushed here, and you don't have to paraphrase, and we can look into that in more detail.
Yeah, I feel like, we could absolutely have a more detailed discussion on this issue, and I'd be happy to do that.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Tevin. All right, we're going to go to our next person. Daniel Hirsch, will you please unmute yourself and state your affiliation and provide your question or input?
My name's Dan Hirsch, Committee to Bridge the Gap. I'm really frustrated by your song and dance today. You've taken half of the time. It should have been public comment, but in fact, that doesn't matter because you aren't taking public comment. The work plan for the cleanup of the Area 1 burn pit is flagrantly inadequate. It would leave the great majority of the contaminated soil unremediated. I'm afraid that today's event is just a PR effort with meaningless opportunity for public input, because the grossly weak plan we are to comment on is actually the embodiment of an agreement that Boeing and DTSC signed more than a year ago after secret negotiations. DTSC will not and cannot take any of the public's concerns into consideration now, because it already gave away the store a year ago in the backroom deal with Boeing. We would not even be here discussing the Area 1 burn pit if the predecessors to Boeing and DTSC had done their job in the first place. Instead, Rocketdyne chose to save money by doing open air burning of toxic materials for decades, and the regulators didn't stop it. Rocketdyne's memo from 1959 said they did this to save money and to reduce the hassle of having to get permits. They burned material, radioactive materials there illegally as well. Workers at the burn pit would shoot at the barrels to ignite them. The toxic fumes from the smoke traveled far beyond the burn pit itself, falling out widely on the land. There are two major issues with the narrow list of contaminants considered in the work plan. First, this list excludes 80% of the contaminants actually detected at the burn pit, thus exempting them from any cleanup at all. Secondly, the cleanup for those 20 contaminants that are included are far, far weaker than is protective for human health and biological receptors. The work plan actually precludes cleanup to a human health-based standard, and instead merely uses dramatically weakened ecological risk-based screening standards levels that DTSC and Boeing admit would leave behind toxic concentrations that would produce observable adverse effects in the biological receptors, your so-called high echo ripsols, and then 10 times the high echo ripsols, ones which you admit will cause observable adverse effects in the biological receptors. Thus, the great majority of the pollution is to be left unremediated. I know you're going to cut me off so you can rebut, but this is not what a public comment period should be about. It's not a chance for you to take most of the time and rebut any criticism. You're supposed to listen to the criticism,
We're
which we
trying
know
to
can't happen because
ensure
you've
that
already signed a
everyone
deal with
has,
Boeing.
we want to ensure that everyone has time to provide their input. If you have a question, if you can ask your question, we can answer that. But if it's if your input is lengthy, if you can email that to us, and then if you want to ask a question here, we can certainly respond to that. And everyone's input is valuable. But you're welcome, if you don't feel like you've finished, then you could re-raise your hand, or if you want to email that to us, we can take that into consideration as well. Did you want to ask a specific question? Okay, thank you, Dan, for your input. Please feel free to email us if you would like to, for us to take in the rest of your input into consideration. Cam Kuta, can you please unmute yourself, state your affiliation, and please ask your question or provide your input?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm Cam Kuta. I'm a member of the public. The Remedial Action Work Plan only has soil remediation goals for about 20% of the chemicals and radionuclides detected at the burn pit. In the raw, a list of contaminants of concern for the on-site workers gives roughly 3 times the number of contaminants than are listed for the cleanup itself. One of the radionuclides, which is completely excluded from cleanup in the raw, for example, is the highly carcinogenic radium-226, which Boeing and DTSC admitted to finding in the area in 2008. The ISE orders are meant to be protective of the public's health and the environment, but the RAW prohibits remediation to human health cleanup levels. In regards to the chemicals, only ecological risk-based screening levels are applied to the cleanup, which are greatly weaker than the standards for human health. Furthermore, it chooses the weakest possible cleanup standards for biological receptors, standards that Boeing and DTSC admit will leave contaminants at concentrations that will cause observable adverse effects in the animals. And in the case of almost half the chemicals in the raw, there's a 10 times multiplier on top of the already woefully inadequate ecological risk-based screening levels, which allows extremely high levels of chemicals to remain in place. DTSC claims this is only an initial cleanup and that more cleanup might occur later in the general burn pit area, but this is nonsensical. If the area is so contaminated it requires an ISE order to clean up immediately, then it should be cleaned up to the full extent immediately. DTSC is knowingly allowing Boeing to leave harmful toxic contaminants behind, and there is no reason for the public to believe that DTSC will enforce a further cleanup. A parallel of this cleanup is the sodium burn pit in Area 4, which had a similar initial cleanup over 20 years ago, and there has been no further cleanup since then.
2 minutes are up.
The RAW carries out the burn pit consent order, which was already agreed upon in a secret negotiation between Boeing and DTSC in 2022, where the public was not given any opportunity to submit comments. I'm afraid this post hoc public comment section tonight is just a publicity move to try to improve DTSC's battered image and will not have any meaningful effect on the soil cleanup, as DTSC and Boeing have already approved the fundamentals in the backroom deal of last year.
Cam, we are at time. Thank you so much. Thank you for your input. Okay, we're going to take another. Melissa Bumstead, will you please unmute yourself, state your affiliation, and please ask your question. Oh, I'm sorry, hold on. Let me move I'm sorry. Please go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question or provide your input.
Hi, my name is Melissa Bumstead. I'm with Parents Against the Santa Susana Field Lab. My daughter is a 2-time cancer survivor. She's one of 80 children in the local community that's been diagnosed with cancer. One of the things that I find really confusing about this, the RAW and the ISE, is that human health is not being taken into consideration for this emergency cleanup, only biological. receptors are. And instead of using risk-based screening levels, there's only been ecological TRVs. I don't see any reason why DTSC should be ignoring human health with this cleanup, and why the cleanup levels are not to human health standards, or even really to even ecological standards, when the levels have been changed to allowing observable harm to the wildlife. But I just wanted to understand, what is the reasoning behind not setting this cleanup to protect human health when we all live so close by? And DTSC is very well aware of all the people in the community who have been harmed and who are concerned about health risks because of this extremely dangerous contamination. If it's going to be an imminent danger emergency order, it should be obviously protecting human health as well. And I believe that is part of the DTSC's mission statement.
Thank you, Melissa, for your input and your question. Does anyone from the technical team want to respond to Melissa's question?
Yeah, yes. Thank you, Jamie. So we do have monitoring reports in terms of quarterly monitoring reports for groundwater and air particulate and VOCs, anything in the air, because we do have a monitoring station that comes to us. This particular ISNE order was based on ecological receptors and the radionuclide in the shallow zone, and also to stabilize the site. By no means are we not paying attention to human health, because next year we are expecting a corrective measure study that would include all risk-based cleanup goals based on risk to human health. Does anyone else like to elaborate on that?
Yes, Patrick, I can elaborate on that. You're right. This is an initial cleanup, but it is not full cleanup of the Area 1 burn pit. And when the final cleanup is done, it will include and address human health risks. So stay tuned for that, and I'm sure that you'll find that this site is going to be cleaned up to be protected for both human health and ecological receptors.
Thank you, Patrick, and thank you, Dawn. And we just want to remind everyone that we are taking all of the comments and input into consideration. And if there are any revisions that need to be made to the raw DTSC, we'll request that. So please continue to put your questions into the Q&A. You can also write into us or email into us. And we're going to go to the next person with raised hands. Catherine Rodriguez, will you please unmute yourself, state your name and affiliation, and please ask your question or provide your input.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Hi, my name is Catherine Rodriguez, and I'm just a member of the community. I'm a mother of 3, and I just wanted to say, like, I'd like my children to play and grow and thrive in a healthy, safe environment, and that's how come I feel it's important that we clean up all the toxic waste, like all of it, because it leaves residue and things like that, and it'll go through, it'll find a way. And I just feel like I gotta say, like, we should clean it up, so not just my kids, but all the kids in the community can just have no worries and just grow and play safely wherever.
Thank you, Catherine. We're going to go to the next person, Tiffany Ruiz. Can you please unmute yourself, state your name and affiliation, please ask your question or provide your input. Can you please unmute yourself and ask your question or provide your input? Okay, feel free to raise your hand and we'll come back around. We're going to go to the next person, Chris Rowe. Can you please unmute yourself, state your name and affiliation, and please ask your question or provide your input?
Hi, this is Chris Rowe, and I'm a resident of West Hills. I've lived here for over 45 years, I've been involved with the Santa Susana cleanup as a technical stakeholder since 2007. I used to attend meetings at the DTSC Chatsworth office. We used to have regular meetings. And I first learned about the Area 1 burn pit from Laura Rainey, who was later the manager for Area 4. And I do remember the reference at that time to the radium in Area 1 burn pit, because I believe the radium came from dials and instrument panels, was one of the potential sources for the radium. I also wanted to make a comment because of the concern of Julie Kornstein. One of the things that the federal EPA, when they first looked at this site to determine if it qualified as a Superfund site, their justification was it didn't qualify initially based on radionuclides. It qualified based on groundwater and the fact that former employees had ingested groundwater at just a brief point in time. And the problem with the groundwater was that they were worried about cross-contamination between the drinking water wells that were used at that time by the employees and the other groundwater wells. And so what I'm saying is I've been at the site with DTSC, and the migration of the groundwater was only to the northeast, just across the street from Sage Ranch. They sampled there, and they didn't believe that the groundwater contamination went beyond that area. They sampled down by Woolsey Canyon further. Tom Seckington was very involved with this. And also at a meeting of the water board, they had in Simi Valley, they determined that the perchlorates that were used at Santa Susana were not the same type. They typed the perchlorates, and they were what was found in the groundwater well. So when people are drinking groundwater or water that's blended in Simi Valley, it's not the same perchlorate as found at Santa Susana. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Chris, for your input. Patrick, did you want to respond to anything in Chris's comment?
I think it was more of an input. If there's anything that Bill likes to add as far as groundwater monitoring. But I mean, radium was mentioned, and radium is part of the sole remedial goals for this particular cleanup, and the value that we use for that has come from US EPA background studies. So we have a background threshold value that we use as our cleanup remedial goals for radium-226.
Thank you. All right, well, we're going to take a couple of people from the phone. So with the person whose number starts with 831 and ends with 343, can you please press *6 to unmute yourself, and then please state your name and affiliation, ask your question, or provide your input?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. This is Hoken Williams, a member of the public. Many of us in the community surrounding the field lab have long ago come to expect disrespect and manipulation from DTSC, but this hearing takes the cake. We're being told that DTSC is soliciting public comment on the burn pit cleanup, when in fact this pretense of caring what the public thinks about the burn pit is a complete sham. The truth is, most of the significant parts of the remedial action work plan were set in place over a year ago when DTSC signed the imminent and substantial endangerment order. That order set in place the major components of a cleanup that, as you've heard today, is grotesquely inadequate for the severity of contamination at the burn pit. The ISE order had no public comment and no environmental review. It should never have been signed. But basing the burn pit cleanup on this fraudulent order has been a great way for DTSC to skirt the proper public process evading substantive scrutiny for a cleanup it knows the public has every reason to be upset about. To pretend to provide the public an opportunity to comment on the burn pit cleanup, when in fact all the significant decisions have long ago been made, is an insult. And make no mistake, the decisions that were made on the burn pit cleanup were horrible and absolutely should have been subject to public input, real public input. I mean, no human health-based cleanup, no cleanup for most of the burn pit's highly contaminated 27 acres, cleanup for only a tiny handful of contaminants, leaving 4/5 of the contaminants detected at the burn pit completely untouched. If this is what we can expect from DTSC for the rest of its cleanup of the field lab, then it's going to be exactly as bad as activists in the community have long been saying. DTSC is going to condemn our neighborhoods to toxicity and sickness, and it's going to do so wearing a sickly sweet smile the whole time. Do better, DTSC. Rescind the burn pit imminent and substantial endangerment order. Conduct the cleanup of the burn pit properly under the guidance of a real public process, and cleaned up to the background levels you have long promised the community. Thank you.
Thank you for your input. Will the next person with the number starting with 818 and ending in 402, please unmute yourself, state your name and affiliation, and please ask your question or provide your input.
Hi, Jamie. This is Stephanie Lewis. I don't have a comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Will the person whose number starts with 916 and ends in 402, please unmute yourself, state your name and affiliation, and please ask your question or provide your input. Okay, let's take someone with that's not on a phone. Tiffany Ruiz. Will you please unmute yourself and state your name and affiliation, and please ask your question or provide your input.
Thank you so much for taking this time to let us speak. My name is Tiffany Ruiz. I live and work in Simi Valley. I just wanted to mention that I'm one person, I'm one mother here taking the time out to speak, but really I represent hundreds and hundreds of other people that have the same feelings as I do about this. They just don't have the time to do this over and over again while they're trying to cook dinner and put together kids. In fact, my 5-year-old has heard so many of these that, excuse me, that he's actually come up with a comment of his own. But just I want to say that, please, DTSC, you guys have an obligation to protect human health. And I ask that the burn pit remediation be done to human health risk standard, not just an ecological standard. That's my understanding that you guys were planning on doing that. Just because we know that the SFL contamination can migrate off site. And so it's imperative. There are children in this community that are getting very ill. Yes, and my son, my 5-year-old, has a comment. Go ahead, please.
We should really need to tell Boeing to clean up the mess.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tiffany, for your input. Michaela Parrington, will you please unmute yourself and state your name and affiliation, and please ask your question or provide your input.
Hi, my name is Michaela. I'm a community member. I am concerned about this cleanup plan, that it is not going to be a cleanup to the agreed upon background levels. And my question is, why isn't the human health being considered in this plan? Why is it just not being considered? And why isn't the groundwater and also the soil being considered? That off-site contamination has occurred and has affected countless residents' health.
Thank you, Michaela, for your input and your question. And Michaela would like to know why human health cleanup standards are not being considered. Who from our project team would like to respond?
So Jamie, I can start. And I wanted to say that, well, thank you so much for your input and your question. DTSC is very concerned about the human health of not just the community, but all Californians, and I do understand your concern. At the present time, we are doing risk assessment, human health risk assessment, that has to do with all areas of Boeing, all the areas of responsibility. At the same time, we're also evaluating impact to groundwater, and those particular feasibility study at the present time have not been approved. They would be approved by the end of next year. So we really would like to have a very comprehensive, very informative knowledge as to what it is that we need to clean up to, and what are the contaminants, and what is the impact to groundwater, and what level should be adhered to be protective of human health. And for that particular purpose, we are expecting corrective measures study to come in next year, and that would address cleanup of human health based on the ongoing risk assessment that we're doing. There's going to be a corrective measures study for groundwater, as well as one for soil that would address human health.
Thank you, Patrick. And Bill, do we have any Q&A that we can read and have our project team respond to?
Yes, we do. A lot of the questions that have come through the Q&A have either been asked directly by one of the participants over the phone and live, but we have plenty of others that have good topics that we really want to kind of talk about and discuss here. Give me 1 second. This one is regarding worker safety. It says, I assume that the workers will be wearing respirators and hazmat type gear as we saw during the sampling in Area 1, or pardon me, Area 4. This pertains to the Area 1 burn pit ISC removal action. So regarding the PPE, they're asking, will there be respirators and hazmat gear during those activities?
I can start, Jamie. So this is a level D cleanup. There will not be a respirator, but there are ongoing monitoring on site to make sure that there's no endangerment to the workers. We are monitoring particulate. We're also monitoring water, organic compounds, hydrogen sulfide, carbon monoxide, oxygen level, explosive fume. These will all be monitored. And as I said earlier, we also have the device that they would be bearing on their collar, that the breeding zone that they are breeding is constantly being measured, and that would go to a lab and it would come back with a result. And we want to make sure that we are protective of all the workers on site.
Thank you, Patrick.
I don't know if the question mentioned radionuclide. No, I think it was just, I'm sorry, you can go ahead. It was about a respirator.
Yeah, it was just about respirators and then hazmat gear.
They would be wearing proper PPE, and that would include, that would not include a respirator. But if we arrive at a conclusion that it is needed based on the monitoring and the sampling of personal air that they're breathing, we would definitely enact that. And again, this is not a final removal action work plan. It is a final draft, and we are considering all inputs from the public. So thank you for providing your inputs.
Thank you, Patrick. And we have 10 more minutes left in this public meeting, so please continue to put your questions in the Q&A. Bill, would you like to read another question or provide an input from the Q&A?
Yes, we have another question. This is from Jenny Knack. Since the geotextile fabric was cited as being effective for controlling contaminant migration and erosion, why not replace this technical fabric or the geotextile fabric instead of the plastic sheeting being referred to?
So there is geotextile, polypropylene geotextile covering 12 areas at Area 1 burn pit site to protect any runoff and contaminant migration.
Thank you. Sarah, did you have something to contribute? And anyone from the project team, feel free to chime in at any time.
Yeah, I'm wondering if there was a miscommunication with regards to the plastic sheeting that would be covering the trucks.
Those are particular tarp that is used for this particular purpose. It's common practice that whenever we haul hazardous waste, we have these particular covering, and it does protect against water, and it does protect against any particulate escaping.
Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you, Patrick. Bill, do we have another?
Do have several others. Give me one moment. I've got to go through some of the.
While you go through it, I'll take another
one
person from the from raised hands. Let's see. Bonnie Klee, you are back in line if you would like to unmute yourself and provide your question or input.
Thank you. I already spoke, and I have nothing new to add.
Okay, I'll go ahead and lower your hand. And then Christina Walsh, will you please unmute and ask your next question or provide your input?
Yes, thank you. I wondered, because of some of the concerns when we were in the field with EPA for the on-site RAD survey, they used ground penetrating radar because of the concern of some of the potential hazards in what they were dealing with. And I wonder if that has been done to characterize here. I also wondered if you could expand or describe better what TARP criterion means in the figures as far as the standard and how that is applied. And then regarding dust mitigation, in addition to the truck, I'm not sure if it's called active, but a guy with a hose that is visually monitoring so you don't have saturation is really important to have at all times. And I would request that. And then finally, the NASA is doing sort of a rotational vapor removal study that seems very promising. And I wondered if that would be considered here to continue to remove the VOCs beyond just soil removal. Thank you.
Thank you.
So
go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Jamie. So thank you, Christina, for the questions. So soil vapor extraction is definitely a remedy that would be considered for the final cleanup. I do know that there are some issue with deeper soil vapor at Area 1 burn pit, and those would definitely be addressed in a final cleanup. I'm trying to see what there are. So there are trucks on site, and they are constantly would be watering, but you also want to make sure that we're not putting so much water that it would actually be more harmful in terms of carrying contaminants across. So there are people and there are safety personnel on site that monitor, and accordingly they do spray water.
Thank you, Patrick.
And the ground penetrating radar, has that been done at this area? Because that might identify metal objects. There was a lot that were pushed back into holes that was historically common across the site. And I just wondered if you had any information on that.
I don't have an information to that. What I can share with you is that I have been to the site myself, and I have walked over the geotextile area where there are radionuclides contaminant on site, and I used our monitoring devices from DTSC. I used the Ludlum, and as far as alpha and beta and gamma radiation, there was nothing above background. As far as anything deeper, I don't know. I would have to go back to the RFI report or the summary report and produce an answer for you. unless another team member has an answer.
Yeah, I was referencing when people were talking about the hill exploding. That would require something to be there. That was the reason for my comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Kip Drabeck, will you please unmute yourself, state your affiliation, and provide your question or input? And we have 4 minutes left in the meeting, everyone. Okay, I'll move on to the next person. Seti Kane, will you please unmute yourself and please state your affiliation and provide your question or your input?
Hi, my name is Seti Kane. I'm a concerned community member. I understand that an ISE is not the final cleanup action, but I'm failing to understand why this is necessary at this juncture. The justification provided in the order was that this cleanup is necessary and simply must be exempt from CEQA because the geotextile fabric is at risk. But you've not adequately explained why this risk makes it appropriate to limit the cleanup to the 12 chemicals of ecological concern listed in the RAW, when so many were detected in the burn pit above ecological risk-based screening levels. Furthermore, 77 contaminants exceeded the human health-based screening levels. For the communities that live around the site, migration of contamination is a great concern. The RAW calls for the removal of the geotextile fabric and excavation of contaminants only in hotspot areas that exceed the high ecoripsols, or in some cases 10 times the high ecoripsols. This leaves significant amounts of contamination in place, contamination that could migrate down and into the surrounding communities, especially in the event of a wildfire or a significant rain event. Many of your answers this evening have skirted around actually addressing the community's comments and concerns. This cleanup was supposed to be completed in 2017, and the fact that now, 6 years later, DTSC has released an imminent and substantial endangerment order is frankly a joke and incredibly disrespectful to the community who's been waiting since 2007 for the promised cleanup. This comment period, which DTSC keeps emphasizing is a courtesy rather than a legal necessity, comes off as disingenuous and simply raises concerns as to the nature and extent of the future cleanup. We need a full cleanup of SSFL that is to background and protective of human health. Thank you.
Thank you, Seti, for your input. Everyone, we have 2 minutes left in the meeting. I will allow Jenny Knack to please state your question or your input.
Hi, I'm Jenny Knack. I'm with Parents Against SSFL. I'm also dismayed at skirting around CEQA regulations at such an extensively contaminated area of the site, because what's going to happen is we're going to be mobilizing soil, allowing it to possibly migrate with more ease. But I'm going to actually take a left turn here, and I need to respond to Patrick's response to a woman who was concerned about her drinking water. Patrick, you're in Canoga Park, and she was referring to her family in Simi Valley. 30% of Simi Valley residents have a private water distributor that uses wells, water from 2 wells, to mix with a residential blend that the EPA has stated could potentially be contaminated with SSFL groundwater. We are in this meeting talking about rerouting water into unlined ponds, which can then further recontaminate groundwater. I think it was irresponsible of you to assure the person that her drinking water was safe, because yes, while the private water source does have to submit their quarterly testing on their list of contaminants, we don't know if they are testing the water when they're using a 3% of water from those wells or 67%. That is information we do not have. And so I don't think that we should be reassuring the public that their drinking water in Simi Valley is safe. Yours might be in Canoga Park. I think there's still some potential loops here in Simi Valley. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hey, Jenny, I wasn't aware where that person was calling from.
Okay, I would be happy to send you more information on that if you'd like, but we have an issue here. A potential.
Your audio went out if you were still.
Sorry. Thank you, Patrick, for acknowledging that you might have been ignorant about the issue, but it is a worry to many, or at least 30% of Simi Valley residents. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jenny. And thank you everyone for your participation and for your attendance tonight. Here are ways that you can stay connected. Please visit our DTSC SSFL webpage to enter more input for this RAW. Also to review frequently asked questions, view site documents, sign up for our e-list, or access the new public community survey. Thank you for your interest in the Santa Susana Field Laboratory, and thank you for your attendance tonight. Thank you and have a great night, and we will now end the meeting.